Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Mondays with Moshe. This week, the topic of discussion is the process of connecting in therapy. Speaking of connecting, we only have one person whose video is turned on. Hey, Gabriel Fagan, you haven't been on here in quite a while. It's good to see you back. Soon we'll have you pinned one of these weeks. Okay, so Gabriel, good to have you back on the show. He was actually one of our pioneers, one of our first weeks. Gabriel agreed to join us and spoke about the process of working with perpetrators, which was really fascinating. For those of you who could turn on your video, that would be really awesome. We could see you. Thank you, Shifi. And it becomes more personal. And of course, don't forget to raise your hand using the bottom right of the screen, the reactions tab, to ask a question. Tonight, we have the honor of the presence of Barry Horowitz, who is an LCSW out in, I'm not going to say where, it's a trigger word for some of us. Okay, New Rochelle. Ouch. Barry was like the first person who Googled the definition of the word quarantine.
Yeah.
Because he was one of the first people in the United States to actually quarantine. Is that right, Barry?
That's true. They actually, New Rochelle was a sleepy little town. Gabriel knows New Rochelle. That's what it was, like what happened in New Rochelle. And then everything happened in New Rochelle,
It all started in New Rochelle.
Yeah, they say anyway. Right.
So Barry is going to tell us a little bit about himself. And tonight, again, like I said, for those of you who are just logging in, tonight's topic is the process of connecting in therapy. Barry, I hope we could talk a little bit about connection, how we foster connection with our clients in therapy, perhaps with some of our more difficult clients, and how important is it really? I mean, I wonder if we could just use some good old-fashioned interventions to help clear people of their anxieties or their traumas. And, is connecting, do they really need to feel us as a person in therapy? Hopefully we'll be able to talk about that tonight. But before that, Barry, just tell us the population that you work with. What's some of your background, your clinical professional background, and the population that you work with, and how you fell into that population or chose?
Sure. That's first of all, Moshe, it's going to be cheesy to say it, so I'll say it. It's been, I know this forum has been around for a while. I'm first learning just how impressive it's been. So you've got a fan for life for me, but I will say it's really great, and seeing some old friends already online, it's really nice. And we know that working through our own challenging work days and into the nights, forums like these, I think, provide us an opportunity to, that's the buzzword, to connect. And I'm sure we'll talk as time goes by about the research on attachment and what that means. But it's good to be connected. In terms of my background, I'm a guy who just likes to hear the stories of others. It's a crazy thing to say. I'm lucky. I think from an early age, I just found that the human process is such an incredibly powerful one and nuanced one, and so I just took to it early, I think. Professionally, though, I would say I started off at OHEL in Brooklyn, OHEL Children's Home, and provided really, as in our field, jumped right in to provide trauma-specific treatment in regards to childhood trauma, sexual abuse, and other forms of trauma, as well as adolescence and family work. And since then, I've been working both in agency work as well as in private practice. And now over the past 7 or 8 years, really increasing my work with consultations with earlier professionals as well, working with a lot of trauma and abuse and anxiety, depression, adolescence, and a lot of family work as well.
Okay, thank you. So you're talking about trauma, you're talking about adolescence.
Which to parents is trauma, really.
Which what?
Which is trauma to a parent,
To a
right?
parent,
Adolescence,
adolescence,
right?
yes.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So, some of this is can be a pretty difficult population sometimes to connect with. I mean, we have the kids who are so traumatized that they can't speak. We have
Yeah.
the kids who are so traumatized that they can't trust. And we have the kids who are so traumatized that they can speak but stonewall and give the clinician a really difficult time. I think one of the things you're fairly renowned for is being able to connect with some of these teens or children or some of this population in a very unique way. Can you tell us a little bit about how you do it?
I could try. I think one of the things that we try to keep in mind, and I'm sure I'm sure those in the audience as well feel that way too. We're in a world where there are a lot of flyers about techniques and methodologies. We learn about how borderline personality disorder could be cured in 5 or 6 sessions, or complex post-traumatic stress disorder can be, as long as you use this technique or that technique, which is you know technique-based work. I think is good, and we want to be cutting edge. But I had a supervisor who told me really early in my work that it's who you are, and not the techniques that you use. Um,
Well, can that be identified? That's $1 million question that I always have.
yeah.
Can can your R be identified? Can it be put into words?
Well, that's a good question. Oftentimes it's not even words, right? I mean, to use a play on that, it's the ability to read the room, right? It's the capacity to see the person across from you, and to just want, like I said in the beginning, just want to hear their experience, you know, and starting with that and giving them, we learned in grad school so many years ago, right? It's about building up the therapeutic alliance, right? The capacity to join with the client, I think is really, really important. Interestingly, Wampold says that, and if I'm rambling, let me know. Um, Wampold, who worked with some pretty tough patients, he did a lot of research on this, and and he said that perhaps the techniques that we use might represent about 10-15% of ultimate, clinical growth for the client. But even there, it needs to be within the context of a working alliance. We get it wrong sometimes, though, because with we used to call it therapeutic rapport, right? That you have to have rapport with the client. And rapport with the client means, and this is where I find I will mess up sometimes, and sometimes, earlier in the career, it'll happen as well, where we go into the field because we care about people. We want to get close with them. We want to be friendly with them. And if we could be friendly, aka building rapport, then we feel like we could work. But Wampold and others say it's not exactly that. It's the alliance. And what that basically means is, and Bessel van der Kolk speaks about this, it means that we're working together on a common set of goals, right? That we could disagree at times. We could in fact, oftentimes we will get into the mud, right? But we feel at the end of the session, and critically in the beginning of the session as well, that we're going in a certain direction together, right? So that might, depending on your therapeutic modality, that might be, lowering cognitive distortions, right? I have a terrible schema of self that I'm no good, right? And we're gonna work together to shift that, whether that's through ACT, where we're kind of going towards acceptance of it, whether it's towards cognitive behavioral therapy, whether it's through family work. We might decide that that is the focus that we're going to be working on together, and we'll figure out together how to do that. But if we have that general goal that, okay, this is what we're honing in on, then we're probably going to be okay. It's simplifying it, but that's a big part of the therapeutic relationship, is that, and therefore a big piece of the of what we look for in terms of, you know.
So, okay, so let me make sure I understand. What you're saying is that as long as the two of us come to a mutual working alliance, a mutual working conclusion, then whatever technique or modality or what have you we choose to use, or the therapist is proficient in, is going to make much less of a difference, but will be accomplished.
Right.
Right.
Now, obviously, in some areas, it does make, you know, it's more, right? So,
Generally speaking.
right.
Okay. Now I think the problem that comes up is when there's a rift somewhere in the alliance, not in the modality. So I, as the clinician, I'm the expert. I know how to do CBT or ACT or family
Relapse
systems,
prevention or family systems.
ERP, and yeah, and I know how to do that very well. So you're sort of going to defer to me as the client because you don't really know how to do that. But I don't like, or you as the client don't like my person, something about my personality or how directive I am or how passive I am. It's getting on your nerves.
Mhm.
Now, in order for me to be an effective clinician, what I'm hearing from you is that we have to, you know, it's the tool is only 15%. The other 85% is the alliance. So are we starting to lose the alliance and thereby lose the therapy if the client is starting to not like me?
Well, it's an interesting question as well, right? Does the client have to like us, right? Do we have to like the client? I mean,
It's on my
that's, you
list
know,
of questions for tonight.
yeah. Well, here's the thing, right? And I'm sorry, I see Gabriel. So Gabriel Fagan and I have been, you know each other professionally for really, you know.
Well, do you like each other? That's the main question.
That's the problem. The issue is, so what happens if I like him and he doesn't like, no. So
Then you're
we
back in high school.
we know each other since you know, a few years after I broke in, which was 1943, I think. Gabriel, was that it? We've worked on some really tough cases, right? And early in my career, you work with, let's say, someone who had done some really tough, had really hurt kids, like really hurt kids, right? And I had a supervisor, Dr. Martinez, Doug Martinez, still in the field, still doing his thing. I owe him a lot in terms of my knowledge within the field. And I remember we would do assessment, individual work, group work, really cutting edge stuff. And he was a very cognitive behavioral relapse prevention, like that was his thing, you know. And back in the day, that was the thing. So there I am, right out of grad school, and I'm sitting across from someone who, let's just say, whose values or whose behaviors really did not match mine, right? And I have to figure out a way to treat this person. So for me, cognitive behavioral therapy was perfect, right? Because, and relapse prevention, right? Because it was scientific, it was, you know,
Unpersonal.
thoughts, feelings, behaviors, what moved you towards the acting out behaviors, what'll move you away from them, relapse prevention, the circles, you know, like seemingly unimportant decisions, right? It was clean, right? It was clean, and I was doing crap work. I really was, and I was struggling with it. And when people would ask me outside of session, you know, you're doing that type of work, how you do, you know, and I would say, you know, I had my answers, my safe answers, you know. The answer
Evidence-based.
was
Evidence-based practice.
evidence-based. It's evidence-based, right? Clean. You know what else, Moshe? You know what else I would say? I would say, why am I working with? Well, because if I could help one of these, if I could stop, not help, if I could stop one of these people's cycle, then I'll be saving so many kids. And it was still no good. It was still, why? Because I wasn't connected, right? And Doug he was just waiting. You could just tell he was waiting. And one day, talking to one of the guys, and holiday was coming up, and is he, what's everyone doing for the holidays? And one guy says, yeah, I'm gonna spend it myself, right? And I'm like, just by natural, I said, oh, that's not, why are you spending? And then it hit me. He had to be spending it by himself. He wasn't allowed to spend it with his family. And I'm driving home, and I'm thinking about that, and I'm like, ah, poor guy, like. And I'll never forget it. I tell the early professionals I work with all the time, I was on the Belt Parkway, and I literally pulled over, and I called Doug, and I said, Doug, I got to get out of this field. I can't do this. I can't do this. He goes, Horowitz, what's that? You okay? This and that. He said, what happened? What's going on? And I told him, I know you're going to say, but I'm thinking about this guy, I'm worried about this guy. And he laughed, and he said, Horowitz, welcome to your first day as a therapist. and that's what it is. You don't have to, you're going to like people you never thought you would like, or parts of people, right? Oh, that's safe, right? I don't like them. Only parts of it, right? You're also gonna have times where you hate people that at forums you're never gonna say you hate, right? I could say it. Sometimes people who have gone through trauma are really, really, really difficult in the office. Like, and right. So up is going to be down sometimes. Down is going to be up sometimes. There's a difference between Western culture liking and what I mean by identifying, connecting with the client. If you can't, you got to give it some time, of course, right? But if you can't, or if you're not allowed to, or your own, I mean, I don't have stuff, thank God, but anyone else in the audience here who might have stuff, right? If you can't, if you can't work that through with your own therapist, again, I don't have a therapist. My kids are of age where, they're looking for marriage. So of course, I'm not, just to make it clear, I'm not, but if you can't work it through, then you can have trouble, quote unquote, making someone change, which is its own issue in itself.
So Barry, if must you like your client, or must you like parts of your
Yeah.
client to
Yeah.
to induce change?
No, but I truly believe that there's no all or nothing. That's trauma talk, I guess. And whoever had trauma gets to drink now, right? Whoever said that it would be the first time to hear trauma 20 minutes into the discussion. But I don't think that I don't think that you need to like all of your clients. I don't even think you need to like them for them to change. First of all, there are a lot of people who change despite us. So, we have to recognize that, right? But in order for us to help elicit change, we do have to identify. We do have to feel connected with them. I think you have to. That's
So
my.
let's take some of the hard kids who come in, and I've seen
I mean,
this.
Moshe, is that your sense as well? Right? I mean, I'm I've heard other people say no. I'm fascinated by that question.
That they don't have to, they don't feel like they have to be able to identify with the client on some level.
Right. Like they could be the tabula rasa, so to speak. They could be the blank slate.
I mean, in a lot of the work that we do is relational, and
Right.
you have to be able to really share how you feel, or I should say, what the client elicits in you.
Right.
You know, in order to, if you work relationally, even if
Right.
you're working with psychodynamic work, but there's a lot of relational information that goes on. You know, I was talking about a client who I find myself falling asleep on with my group today, my supervisees, and I felt that the only way that I can get out of this is if I share with him how monotonous and boring he is. And he appreciated that. Like it was probably the first time that somebody didn't just walk away from him and instead shared with him how I feel about him and wondering if we could do something different to make him less monotonous and boring. You know, and it was wonderful. You know, I actually said to him, I find you to be truly insightful. If you could only get the words out faster and not correct and repair every word that doesn't come out perfect, then I probably would find myself much more intrigued. And it's been great. Like, you know,
Right.
so you have to be able to bridge that gap
Yeah.
rather than, you know, just blank slate everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree. And it might be because I do a lot of trauma work that's interpersonal trauma, right? And so there's such an opportunity to work through, you know, trauma. It happens in the context of people, and so it makes sense that to be able to kind of work through that interpersonally is just, such a reparative process,
Sure, sure. I mean, I think that that part of the relationship is really where so much of the healing takes place.
Right. Right. And also in terms of like, I'm sorry, and if you do, if you're inclined to give assignments, right? Who's going to listen to me, and write down every time that they're feeling uncomfortable in public, and then write it down and also lean in, right? There's a degree of trust that has to come with that, which is why the research indicates that people following through on assignments is maybe 10%, and the other, is maybe 10%. But then when you call, if you just leave a message, I read a study where it goes up to like 45%.
Meaning just leave a message that showing that you
Just leave a
care.
message, hey, wondering how it's how the assignment's going.
So
Now,
suddenly it compels them. They feel the person. They
yeah,
feel the person in the relationship.
I matter outside,
Yeah, yeah.
or guilt. Sometimes it's guilt, but
Barry, let's talk a little bit
yeah,
about
the
the stonewalling, you know, quiet kid who comes in and doesn't engage. They give you, if you're at best, if you're lucky, the yes, no, maybe, it's possible, could be, I think so. Those are, I find those to be the most difficult clients to work with because they bring zero energy to the room, and when there's no energy, there's nothing to do with no energy. With energy, whether it's positive or negative, you can use it. You have this uncanny ability to sort of make yourself very vulnerable among people I've seen, and I wonder if you in some way use that. You must use it in the therapy room also. I can't imagine you controlling that in any way.
yeah, I'm not very good at a canned type of a, yeah. So I do try to bring myself into the
You bring a
for
lot of
better or for
yourself.
worse. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you use that in engaging these stick figure clients, and or do you use some other way to bring them out? How do you bring them out?
So Moshe, I agree with you. I don't think there's anything more challenging than the person who's coming in and giving you, quote unquote, nothing, right? Now we know, or we like to say, that by giving us nothing, they're always giving us something. They're showing us that whatever, whether it's we don't matter, or they don't agree that this is what they should be here for, or that they should be the ones sitting in the seat. When I'm at my worst, I'm convincing myself that I don't have to say anything, and that's, I'm cool, I'm all right. Um, but that oftentimes doesn't work either. Like, and then you ask yourself, well, okay, how do I get myself out of this, right? Because we always give supervisees advice and ourselves advice. All right, don't try too hard, right? Don't, because they're right. Okay, so good. So I'm gonna stay quiet, right? Isn't that what we're always told? Okay, good. So right, and that's good if you could catch yourself, because it is uncomfortable. Um, but no one tells us what to do once we're in that quiet for 20
10
minutes,
minutes, right?
right? Like, how do we get ourselves out of it? So some people will say you don't have to, right? And with some clients, if your best guess is that and you go Rogerian, then perhaps that's what the client needs right now, you know, establish their own place. But we know sometimes it's not that.
Yeah, there's a time and place for that. When I like to say when the wheels are turning and there's a process happening, that's when it's appropriate. But when a client is just plain either manipulating by being quiet or just at a loss for words and doesn't really have awareness or can't talk, then we're just wasting time.
So possibly anyway. So I don't like giving too many client examples for obvious reasons. I want to respect their their process. But there's a story that is a bit of an amalgamation, and it's one that even so has been one that well, it's general enough for sure. Um, a guy who was referred, let's say, for addictions work, teenager, um, doesn't want to be there in the worst way, session after session, just kind of like in that place of just not giving very much at all. And so every once in a while you just you just get lucky, right? Because I'm telling this story, it's important for me to tell you that for every one of these stories, there are probably 10 stories of the guy who comes in and is just quiet for 6 or 7 sessions, and then the 8th session, guess what? He stayed quiet. You know, um, I only say that because like you hear these stories and it's like, come on, like it's not, you're either lying or I got to get out of this field because I don't know what the heck I'm doing. So number one, I don't know if you have to get out of the field, but if you do, I probably have to also. But in this scenario, sometimes you get lucky and then you remember it afterwards. It's learning theory, right? Like gets reinforced. So I knew, my gut was telling me this wasn't just someone who is just quiet and is that there was stuff that was there. So this is early in my career, and I saw, back then it was in I oh my God, this is embarrassing. I iPod, an iPod. I saw that I had his iPod, and I don't know why I didn't ask this sooner. I said, you know what? Like, we've been doing this like 3 sessions where I'm asking you questions, you'll answer 1 or 2 words. When it's 3 words, I get to convince myself, oh, he's coming, and then I know, and that's ridiculous, right? But I have a guess that and I might be wrong, and if I am, that's cool. That's okay, but I just have this sense that there is stuff that's going on. But your sense is possibly like a lot of teenagers that we have absolutely no clue, and we're gonna make all these guesses, and that's what I'm basically doing here. I'm just, so I asked them to just, can I see your playlist? Can I just see your playlist? Can I see what you're listening to? And that was, it was a nice beginning, right? And in that regard, look, words are complex. Even when we get words, especially as they get older, into adulthood, they oftentimes hide even more than they provide, right? But music, um it's something that sometimes you can get past all the awkwardness, right? And oftentimes what's nice about it being in the in-between is that they might not be ready to share what's going on exactly with them, right? Sometimes that's even the safe thing to do, right? Because if I say my dad's a bad dude, right? What are you gonna do with that, right? But if you give them the okay, and then you say, but how about we kind of just play some music? It's an example of when you're not locked in emotionally, you have some flexibility, our creative juices go, and it's like, oh, what about music? And that's what, and so ever since then, that's been a way that I've used, and oftentimes sharing my own music, right? Because again, and you have to be careful about it, because just as it's very helpful, also it gets deep fast, right? And so it gets through the defense systems. Sometimes that's great. Other times it could be, dangerous as well. But sometimes that's an example of sometimes how I'll get through it.
So these are nonverbal forms of communicating or getting through to somebody.
Getting through, and then just use of self. You know, I brought up Doug before, Dr. Martinez. He also taught me a phrase that to this day I use, which is, bozos on the bus, right? We are, right? Like we do try to look. I've gone to all these trainings. I've done whatever, EMDR, TFCBT, prolonged exposure, even though a lot of people hate that now, but okay, maybe 10 years from now, people love it and won't like EMDR, right? Who knows, right? And it's good to have them. There's no question. There's no question about it. But I think one of the things, and again, maybe it's because of the of working with trauma so much, is we'll utilize that in order to make ourselves feel safe. But I find that nothing helps more than the person seeing us not taking ourselves too serious. You know what I mean?
But I think
We're in
that's
this.
something you and Gabriel have in common.
Yeah, he doesn't take me seriously either.
That's what I meant.
Yeah. Ouch. No, right. But and again, we could also talk about techniques that do help. But again, over and over again, it's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are in the room. That I think is so important.
I'm wondering, I know this is a little bit of a paradox because I'm asking you to do something on a sort of scientific level, but this is one of my favorite conversations. Can you explain on a more scientific level how being yourself and bringing yourself, and especially, for newer clinicians who really struggle with this, like, how is it that just by being there and being myself, something is happening to the other person? That doesn't seem to make sense linearly or systematically or logically, right? But for those of us who are doing it long enough, it really does make sense.
Yeah.
Right. So can you
And so we need the science. We
yeah,
need the
so
science.
can we put some kind of
All right,
scientific
neural pathways for 100, please. Okay, so and that's an interesting thing about our field. We're both fascinated, enamored by all the crazy, like when I entered the field, who knew what this is, right? Well, you have the 3 bars of brain, and then if you get upset, you flip the lid, right? The Dan Siegel, this is the amygdala, this is the prefrontal cortex, neurocortex, and stuff like that. So by the way, I think that part of that is our insecurity, right? We are the soft science, and in order to be valid, we need to have, research behind us. The problem, of course, with that is our research is so all over the place, right? Which is good, because if you want to do a presentation with PowerPoint, all you have to do is start with your
modality is 90% effective, whichever one it is.
Yeah, you're good. You're good to go, But anyway, but there is, but that said, there is a lot of fascinating work that's going on. Like, look at Rich Yehuda, who not only that would be a good person to have. Wow. Not only studied.
We're on it.
Yeah, I knew. Right. Not only studying.
She said she'll come on if Barry comes first.
Yeah, nice, right? I'd be that opening act any day, any day. So, right, not only studying survivors of trauma, of course, infamous, Holocaust, World War II type traumas, but then children of survivors, grandchildren of survivors. Now that's not enough, right? They have now been looking at epigenetics, right? The transmission of the effects of trauma within the hardwire, within the the genetics of the individual. That's really, really something. Incidentally, that might be a hint as to why anecdotally we see in our offices just so much anxiety amongst the Jewish. I know that that's stereotypical, but I'm not sure it's so stereotypical, right? If there almost has never been a generation without trauma for the past how many generations, and anxiety is an exaggerated alarm system, there might be something to that. Anyway, so
So
in
back
terms
back
of,
to the back to
it
this
takes me a long time to get to an
back to
answer.
that. Let's see. Can you put
Yeah,
words? Can you
yeah,
put words to how it is that people start to
yeah,
heal and
yeah,
improve just out of the depth
yeah,
of the therapeutic relationship?
yeah. So I'll give you two examples, and Moshe, as you're doing well, if I end up in Ronkonkoma somewhere, and
I just want to remind
bring me
everybody, for
back.
those of you who are new here, if you have questions or comments, please use the reactions button on the bottom of your screen and raise your hand, and we will be happy to take it.
Right. So am I freezing? Okay? A couple of examples, right? The first is with the analogy, the loose analogy. Oh, am I back? Have I left? It's a very
You're
existential
here. Yeah, I'm
question.
sorry. I don't know. My computer went out for a second.
Okay.
We lost
See, he comes,
our
he
attachment.
hangs out, and he bails. He's eating a pastrami sandwich somewhere. And
I think we lost our attachment for a minute.
you see, insecure. I'm very insecure
Insecure
about my attachment,
attachment.
right? Anyway, so neuromirroring. The idea there is not only through words, but our body posture, right? Our how we present ourselves to other, right? And we know that if we want to call it subconsciously, if we want to, in other words, there is input that we're sending that has nothing to do with our mouths moving, right? Right now, I'm sitting like this, right? If I am looking up and I'm seeing only screens that are what's called, and I'm not seeing any people, no pressure, but I'm not going to be as likely to be as drawn in, right? And vice versa as well, right? That's why when we listen to an audio recording, right, it's harder for many of us to stay attuned, right? We feed off of the body language of others. Now, I think somatics has its place in that, right? It teaches us about that, right? Not only where trauma is stored within the body, but the messages that we send off about safety, about caring, about boredom, about annoyance, right? If just one more example, right? If I'm looking into this group and I'm bringing something up, and I see one person kind of just going like, now they might be looking over the screen and their kid is saying, right? But they're going like this, right? I'm like, oh shoot, right? So we feed off each other in that regard, and us being attuned to the person across from us, verbal or nonverbal, it matters, right? So our relationship with them is not just what we say, and if we say the exact right thing, it's so much more than that. And a lot of that is the neurological, as an example, neurological piece, right? Especially if they're used to walking into a room and having to wonder, right? Is today the day that dad is in an alcoholic rage or not? Or if right, you ever have a client who's been traumatized and he reaches for his cup and he spills it, right? And you see like that. Now, with me, I probably have spilled the cup like 3 times already, right? And it's not the Rabbi Akiva. There's that story that there was a rabbi who would always spill his cup of wine so that the people would come, they would feel all right. I like to believe that that's why I always spill my my water. It's not that I'm a klutz. It's I want my clients to feel. No, I'm just joking. So that's that piece, right? Now let's. So if they see that happens, and I'm like, oh wow, I thought I'm the only one, right? Then there's a then there's a shift that happens, which means that the nervous system is learning, just like it learned the other way. It's learning a little bit more like, oh wait, that neural pathway gets developed a little bit more.
Okay, so in other words, what I think you're saying is that if a person is conditioned in a certain way and the
Right.
relationship unmimics, if we can use such a word, undoes
That's right.
that neural pathway by
Right.
showing something else, then
Yeah.
that has a healing quality to it because the person could start creating new experiences related to that same thing, other
Right.
than abuse or negative feedback or something like that.
Right. And even if it doesn't fully undo, right? If it's not total extinction, right? It gives a little food for thought, right? And so maybe for a little while in the moment, there's still going to be for a very long time that reaction. But when they're walking or they're just driving and they're thinking about, when their higher level thinking is going on, there's more of a feeling of, and that means that it is there's more flexibility, and trauma is black and white. Nuance is what we try to provide, right?
Explain why is trauma black and white?
Well,
Is it
fight, flight,
do or die?
right?
Yeah.
All or nothing. I have to. I'm always this. And even if it's not trauma, right? Intense schema of self, either good or bad, right? It's
It's a
not nuance.
barrage. It's a barrage of the
Right.
same
Boom.
message.
Right. I'll give one more example. So our ability to present in a certain way, as engaged or laughing at life, non-threatening, the nervous system is picking up on that, right? And there's a chance that will allow then for the vulnerability to eventually come into the office.
So this is,
Right.
I imagine that this is a process that the therapist needs to be vigilant of as it's unfolding. Meaning when people ask us, and this is, I hate this, when they say, so how's he doing? Is he making progress? And you say, well, I noticed that he held eye contact for more than 3 seconds, and they're like, seriously? But did he stop smoking? Like that's what we're looking
Right.
for. And so the progress is something that us professionals are gauging in a completely different way than the rest of the population who just wants him to
And
stop or start doing.
in many different ways. The key there is it not in a different way. We're constantly looking at different variables to see, and one of them oftentimes is the capacity to be comfortable in one's own skin or in the presence of others. Again, especially when the person's challenges are interpersonally
As a person.
based. I'll give one more quick. I'll try to make it more quick in this regard. Of how the neurological piece comes into play, which is so now we have this in trauma work we have so many different methodologies, right? And we don't really know. It's like it could get very, very complicated, very confusing. When do I use it? Which one should I use? Right? Do I go TFC, CBT? Do I go EMDR? Should I do a somatic intervention now? Should I go? Should I just allow for free associative processes? By the way, there's a tremendous amount of overlap, that's for another discussion. But between all, you're not allowed to even say top down anymore. Like you get thrown out of the field, right? But many of the top down approaches are really good. Well, anyway, that stay focused, Horowitz. Okay, the night is moving on. What happens is, right? So you might decide, okay, I'm going to do phase oriented work, which basically means that I'm going to, with all that the first is I want to get towards stabilization. This helped me a lot in working with trauma because I didn't know when to use what. Phase one, Judith Herman, or certain theorists way before her, actually, even in Freud's age, but discuss this, that you have phase one, which is stabilization. Phase two is exposure. Phase three is who do you want to be now that you're kind of able to have processed it through. But phase one is learning how to self-soothe, right? How to engage in the self-soothing process so that you could then get to phase two, right? So that when you do exposure work, you at least have some tools and techniques at hand so that if flashbacks come up, you know what to do, you know how to, right? But here's the thing, right? In many ways, that includes building the safe place, right? Having a place where the person can be, where they can feel like they could just be vulnerable. They could be themselves, right? They can move towards that second phase where they could name the monster or process the monster or find the monster in the body, whatever, however you're gonna, whatever terminology you're gonna use, right? But what happens is that it's not, we're finding it's not just about exposure work itself, right? In other words, that you expose yourself to the experience, and the more that you do that, it comes down. If you have a therapeutic connection with the therapist, right? Now you have a larger association, right? With this place represents a safe place, but not just safe, a warm place, a good place for me, right? Now you have 5 parts of that, right? And then you bite off one part of the trauma. Well, what's happening is that the goodness is engulfing it, right? And so it's not just that it's becoming less, intense because the more I say it, the better. It's being influenced by the associations that he has had for a little while as he walks out the door afterwards, which is, this is a good place. And in association, this is a good relationship, right?
It's like kind of like the Tetris, when you play Tetris and you get rid of one line gets knocked out and then suddenly everything
Yeah,
falls into place in
yeah,
different ways.
right,
Is it?
right. Yeah, but what's happening is it's being associated with the goodness of the relationship. And that you can't teach, that you can't buy, right? Let alone the capacity then, if you have interpersonal challenges coming in, like how can I trust, not just how can I trust others in getting married? I find, and I don't know if you guys find this, it's oftentimes much more, how can I trust myself that I'm going to choose the right person? How can I trust myself, right? Well, if we could be the not perfect, because that's not good either, right? Because then we're setting them up. Don't worry, like, I don't have to worry about that, right? Because I'm not going to be perfect, but the good enough, right?
Good
And
enough.
there it
Good
is
enough
again, the good
person.
enough parent, the good enough person, right? Then it leaves space for rupture repair, the Freudian piece, and it also leaves the capacity that, hey, I chose this therapist, I chose to stay with this therapist. Maybe I could also start making, and even if it doesn't work out so well, I've got some strength,
Some
to try to make
flexibility,
it work
some
out.
flexible thinking is developed.
Anyway, so that's the use of the relationship as a
Barry,
means to,
let's take a question on the connection.
yes, yeah.
Gabriel Fagan, go ahead.
Barry, you're doing great. You're
Yeah,
doing great.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
What, how have you found that kind of sweet spot in finding the balance between a true, deep, meaningful connection and healthy boundaries with clients?
Yeah.
Or
Right.
I guess to ask it differently, like, the use of self to connect versus those healthy boundaries.
Yeah. So that's, with all the niceties about the connections, right? It's not always going to be the use of self in a way that's nice, right? So, I'll give you a good example with that, right? So there's the age-old line of borderline personality disorder, right? How do you do this with someone who has borderline personality disorder? Because we know that they're going to tear you apart. First of all, that's so sad. Like, right? Like, we don't know that they're going to tear you apart, but it is true. You do want to be very careful about boundaries. So for a while, I think the field about 15 years ago decided that as a result, right, because of the challenges, by the way, there's now some research that says that there's such an overlap that many people who have borderline personality disorder really are undiagnosed trauma survivors, right? Interpersonal trauma survivors. That's why, I need you, you're terrible if you mess up, right? Like, that's, anyway. What we had, so I think as a field, what we started to do is we started to decide, okay, the way to treat a borderline, as if that's a word, right, is you have to have very strong boundaries, right? But it's not a stira, just like post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic growth are not a stira. You could have both. In a similar vein, you could have qualities of borderline personality disorder, or for that matter, you could treat someone in your office with clear and relatively consistent boundaries, and not have a heart in doing so. And what it seems like is that we were no better in success rate when we were doing that. That balance, and a lot of times that's through really good introspection and supervision, is to be able to have those boundaries and to have a heart, right? And just like we say with parenting, sometimes you're going to, set those limits, right? You can't, I know you're cutting yourself, but you are such a good person, or like my belief in you is going to be enough. We don't have to set any limits, right? No, like oftentimes you're going to. I don't think the issue is necessarily that. I think it's that we've gone, we forget that you could, I guess, have both. Is that is that at all helpful? Right? In other words, it's not a stira. It's not a stira. It's not a what's the word,
I
Gabriel?
love
It's
it.
not it.
When Barry can't find the English word and he's using
I
the Hebrew
know.
word, that's
It's not a
something else.
contradiction. It's not a contradiction, right?
But Barry,
And by the way, we as therapists, we're not very good at the boundary setting in general.
yeah, and I was going to ask this with someone who's struggling with borderline tendencies, the niceness or the niceties, as you call them,
Yeah.
can be interpreted as poor boundaries, and so then
Yes.
you kind of get stuck in a rut in which
Yes.
if you try to set boundaries after you've done the niceties, then you're suddenly an animal and a horrible person, because how
Yeah.
could you be so mean? So I think included in Gabriel's question would be, how do you strike in other words, the feeling that I get is that your inclination is to be nice, not to be
It's
boundaried
not
first.
it,
Or is
but
it nice in
right.
the context of boundaries, or
But
boundaries
it's
in the
not
context?
necessary. But that's the thing. It's not necessarily nice. It's it's human.
Human.
Do you get what I'm saying? And so, look,
But boundaries
go
is
ahead.
also part of being human.
Well,
So
right,
if you could be human in the sense that you're not just people pleasing by getting the
exactly.
client to like you,
That's
and
right.
instead you're nice and human.
That's right. That's right. We went, and I don't think that it makes us bad. I mean, I think 90% of us went into this field because we care about people. If I may, I think the majority of us, if we are either going to be on the spectrum between being harsh, in other words, too quick to set boundaries versus not quick enough to set boundaries, right? My guess is that we're probably more inclined to not, right? So we have to, we very much, we have to watch that, right? But you're right. That is, if it's, sometimes that is called people pleasing. Sometimes it's whatever. But right. So there is a difference.
Narcissistic injury and
Yeah.
wanting to be
Right.
liked by the client and all that.
Right. Sometimes it's over identification with the person who's gone through a lot. Right. Um, but yeah, the whether it's whichever of those it is, that's being mindful, because as Dr. Pelkowitz says, too much chicken soup can kill, right? Like you're not necessarily doing the client a favor by being people pleasers, but you're not necessarily building having to be a people pleaser to connect.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean?
Could we jump back to an earlier discussion about music for a minute?
Oh yeah.
Okay. When you talked about using music as a way in, do you mean that it settles the nervous system and then the client will begin to open up and talk more? Do you mean looking at the playlist and identifying violent music that the client's interested in, some kind of theme? What do you have in mind?
Yeah. Well, I'll use music at different stages, right? So let's say, for example, in the first stage of work, let's say again, I'm more inclined to talk trauma work. So if people want non-trauma related examples, I could certainly do that, right? But in the beginning, I'll use music to learn who the person is, right? Um, tell me what you listen to. Now, if they are engaged already, um, I'll ask them, when do you use that song, right? Um, who is this representing, right? When did you first start listening to this music as well? When did it matter to you? Things like that. Also, towards the beginning, I'll ask them, okay, we have two types of music that I want to also ask you about, because you're here 1 hour a week, and I know that you're in a tough place, right? You've gone through a lot, and we want to make sure that you've got resources. So I had a supervisor who I think maybe it was Hill Sternstein once said, you never use a technique when you're in crisis, which is kind of sobering. But if you think about it, it really makes sense, right? We teach so many fascinating, methods of grounding, and those could be really good. But again, I think the majority of times when a client is in a tough place, especially in the beginning, we're gonna hope they're gonna remember the methods that they know already. And a lot of times they're going to end up, that's going to continue to be their go-to. But sometimes they'll tell us, yeah, no, I use that mindfulness meditation. And every once in a while, I'm like, no, you didn't, did you? You can tell me. You can tell. So it's like they want us to feel good.
But it's really hard to be having a panic attack and using mindfulness meditation.
Right.
Because you're
Right. It's
freaked
like,
out
okay,
for the panic attack.
Right. Now, the hope is that, they learn it again and again, it becomes muscle memory, right?
Yes.
But especially in the beginning, I want to know what works for them now, right? So music, so right? So one of the things that I do is I ask about what are your healthy distractions, or what are your distractions? What are your attunings? What helps you attune to it, right? And healthy and quote unquote unhealthy. I want to know whatever you use, right? And that could be alcohol, because in the short run, for you, it feels like it works. I want to know that, you know, I want to know if you've cut in the past. I want to know, because even that, right? Like what is cutting? It could be one of many different things, right? It could be the chemicals that are released. It could be the I'm a bad person. It could be
The need to
I'm
feel,
getting the flashbacks. I want to, right, right.
need to
And
feel.
sometimes it's to feel again, right, right, to come back to, right. So it could be one of many things. With music, it's it could be one of many things as well. It could be a means of healthy distraction, right? So I'm in a rough mood, a bad mood. I'm struggling with it, and I'm going to take and I want to listen to that loud, intense, and music that just kind of gets me away, right? And sometimes that's good, sometimes that's important. But then we also want to know, do you have music that helps you tap into what's going on for you, right? So a song like, that sometimes scares the heck out of a parent, right? If used right, in the right way, can tap into the feelings that are going on so that they can take a deep breath and move forward, right? So, and then for exposure, like you have people like NF, who's a rapper who sings really intense songs, but boy, oh boy, you know, it gets to what's going on for a lot of people, right? And so sometimes for exposure work, I'll incorporate music when they're not feeling like they can get to those words, and and so we'll sit and we'll listen to a song a couple of times,
And
right?
that song has content in it that's similar to what we're trying to expose them to.
Yeah.
And to
But no, we're not trying to expose them to, right? I hate to, right, but that taps into for them, like what's going on inside of them, right?
and to use somebody else's wording, meaning we like to try to get the client to describe things in their own words.
Yeah, name them up.
So to use somebody else's words, somebody else's description, that's not the client's own personal. Is that, you don't find that to be a hindrance?
I'll tell you what. There are times when I'll tell you, during COVID, when things were really crazy, and in our community, in our lives, in our um, there were times when I would turn on music and I'd be like, you know what, this is what I need. I can't put it into words the way that they can. On top of which, sometimes the music is more, it was a time of life when the trauma was happening, right? There's another way we use it at times, right? And I can't really tap into it through words, right? But I know when that song comes on, before I'm even, I can't block it with my fancy philosophizing. It gets right to the gut, because there's an association, because that song was popular during that, right? We all have that, right? When I was in Hebrew University for the year, right? Bob Marley, we used to play Bob Marley in the background all the time. To this day, when one of the Bob Marley songs come on, I don't think, "Ooh, I remember that," and then, "Oh, those were good times," and then, that feels nice." The thoughts are like 20 minutes later. Sometimes they don't even happen, and I come home and my wife's like, "Wow, you're actually in a pretty chilled mood. What's going on?" So, and of course I tell her, no, I'm very mindful before I come to the door. Right. So So yeah,
I mean, there's definitely something
musical.
to the music, the associated music. I have a client now who keeps telling me that he'd come home. He was in yeshiva out of town, and he'd come home. He's now 40, but he was in yeshiva back in the day, and he was when he'd come home, it was miserable for him. His father was, was a rager and abusive. His mother would. I don't want to get into details, but
Yeah,
he said that every time he hears a certain song, that was the song that that was the album that played at that period of time when he was coming home. He
yeah,
gets pit in his stomach, and
right,
he literally starts shaking. Gets pit in his stomach.
dude. In July, when I'm watching TV, and all of a sudden, now it's like in like February, when back to school, like they keep pushing it further and further. When a back to school, commercial comes on, my heart goes, oh, right. And I'm like, what just happened? So associations are there. It's very, very, very powerful. You can use it also with, and when you get it, right? When you get it, and then you play a song to the client that lets him know that you get it also. It's just incredibly powerful. And it doesn't have to be music. It could be, during COVID, how many clients were stuck? They were just stuck in their own. And so when they were finally able to get out, many times, we would compare pictures, just get out, take pictures that represent what's going on the outside or on the inside. Again, sometimes words get in the way, and
Yes, yes, and
so
I'd like to believe that we as therapists can leave that impression about us and the experience they had in our room, that association with them when they leave and and they transition out. That possibly there could be some trigger for them that reminds them of the safety, reminds them of their respected self that they got in our presence, that their self was really respected and interesting and cherished,
yeah,
and they could take that with
absolutely.
themselves.
And there was a convention that a famous convention where the head of the convention got up and he said, I want you guys to remember, I want you to go think back right to third grade, right, or elementary school, right, and keep your hands up if you can remember, right. You remember elementary school? Yes. Do you remember what school yes. Do you remember your favorite teacher? Right? Okay, so then some hands went down, right? But most of us still have. And then he asked, do you remember the specific subject that they taught? Right? And the hand goes down. And then they said, do you remember how you felt? And the hand goes back up. Right? Those associations, words are important. They sure are, right? Like for us to name it is but what we leave and opposite what people who traumatize people leave is so much more than words, and that sense of connection. Van der Kolk speaks about this. He quoted a study that blew me away. He said that I'm not going to get it right, but there was a study of at 9/11, right, and the people who were downtown. Right, you might have seen this on one of his YouTube trainings, and he quoted a study where he said that that people who were able to run, right, not run because they weren't stuck in the buildings, God forbid, but run because they weren't in that fight, flight, freeze, in that freeze state, right? And he said he said on average, the people who were able to run suffered lower, on average level, a much lower level of PTSD. But he said what was fascinating was also that where did people run? They didn't run to their offices. They didn't run to the police stations. They didn't even they ran home. People were, illogically even, like, I'm gonna run, cross the bridge up to, right? They had to run. They might not have had to run that far. And he said that hard wiring of, why am I running home? I'm running to the connection, right? I'm running to the people who care. I'm running to the people who care about me. And he said, those people who ran home, on average, did pretty okay. They
But
did
that's
pretty
again,
okay.
that's the attachment, that's the attachment piece
That's the attachment.
to
But that's the hard
prevention.
wiring. That's the hard wiring. You're running home when everything's crazy. You're not thinking of where you're going. Your body's
I
taking
was sure you were gonna say they ran to their therapist's office.
you. Where were the therapists? Yeah, that's big. He also said that interestingly, for this for our times, right? The power of connection. He said that Anna Freud studied fascinating studies, World War II, hopefully the last World War. But he said that when it was England against the world, basically, right? When they're the only ones left before America was quote unquote brought in, or he said, and as we know, like the British were, the civilians were underground. They were in the subway tunnels, and in the bunkers, and they had the idea was they took thousands of the children from London, and they moved them up, up further up north, so that where the Blitzkrieg wasn't dropping the bombs. And Anna Freud and a colleague of hers, whose name escapes me, they did some studies on that, and they found that the level of, they didn't call it PTSD, but the anxiety and difficulties for the kids was, they found much worse for the ones who were sent up.
Were they separated from their parents?
Yeah, the parents were, the family stayed, and these were, and I saw, you see videos, these were lovely orphanages. These were not like the stereotypical, what you would think of like the Eastern European after the war, Eastern Bloc orphanages, where you would have, they're physically, they were cared for, but not emotionally. These were warm places, but we need our families, we need our connections. That's why people who are traumatized by people who are supposed to be the ones that
Their
are
caretakers.
there for them, level of trauma is sky high comparatively, sky high.
What specific symptoms are seen in those? Is that
Much
trust? Trust?
higher levels of PTSD, much higher levels of what we had said before, trust in self,
Trust.
in relation to others. The idea is that bad things, as we grow up, we realize bad things do happen in the world, but home is supposed to be the place that I could kind of breathe, and if I can't, and then if I can't trust myself in that, or trust the others in it, there's no safety. So the nervous system has to always be on. That's a tough. That's why, by the way, bullying has gotten, so many different areas got better, but with bullying, over the past 10 years, there's some disturbing realities, because what happens is, it used to be that if you're bullied during recess, or you're bullied, on the bus, on the way, unstructured times, but when you got home,
You were safe.
you at least know you were safe,
Not
and you have
starboard.
resiliency, you can breathe. It's the attachment piece. Now, so if you get home and you turn on your device, and it infiltrates your safe place, there's no downtime, there's no there's no place for resiliency to build. So
Wow.
anyway,
And
that's
by the way, speaking of bullying, I don't know if it's next week or the following week, we're having one of the masters of bullying. I don't know if you know Brooks Gibbs.
oh wow,
Brooks Gibbs
right.
is coming on the show, and he is, for those of you who want to know who Brooks Gibbs is, I'm going to play a little video surprise for him when he comes on. If you want a sneak preview, you can go onto his Facebook or just Google it. I think it's called "I Love This Girl" or "Why I Love This
Mm,
Girl" or something. And
mm.
he has an absolutely phenomenal 2 or 3 minute clip about
Oh,
his story between him and his wife and how he met her and why he married her. And it's worth watching. Tune in when we have him on if you don't want to take a look at it on your own. But that was really, I was thinking like, see, a process guy, is he going to talk about the process of therapy? He just knows how to help kids with bullying. But when I watched that clip, I was like, I'm having him on. So
it's amazing.
it's really amazing.
Just a plug, if I can, just real fast along these lines, and then maybe I know I talk a lot, so two quick things. As you're in the field longer, we think that we do better as therapists. It's very interesting what happens. In some ways, we get better with techniques because we've learned more of them, and so in that regard and experience, we do better. Where we have to watch for is the again, that's the neural mirroring, the excitement, the passion, the eagerness to learn. That's why something like this is so great. It's resiliency building. If you want to stay young as a therapist, I can't, I am going to give a shout out to my early professionals who I work with. It's incredible. There's a lot of passion that's there. It's also a nice reminder, right? We've
Barry, I
got
don't know
people.
if everyone knows what you're talking about.
Oh,
Tell them
I
about the
do.
early professionals.
Oh, just well, not to get into the specific, but I do. I over the past 10 years or so, I've been doing more and more work with people who are new to the field or who are just entering the field. They teach me a lot. It's crazy what they know in terms of on the on the ground, because that's the work that they're doing. And also they make us, they take us out of our comfort zone a little bit. So at Nefesh, for example, there's a big strong core of early professional. Nefesh is an organization for Jewish mental health professionals, and so that's where I kind of hone my skills in doing this. It's really good for resiliency building for the we'll call established professionals or professionals like me. So I highly recommend it. It's a really good thing, and peer supervision and therapy, right? If you want to call your therapy peer supervision also, you could do that. So
If you have children who are getting married.
and that's fine too, right? For those of you who need therapy,
Barry, we have to have like a peer supervision group where like the only thing we talk about is how we're feeling in the room. How I'm feeling about what you're saying and how you're feeling about what I'm saying, and just straight up feeling. That brings such a strong awareness to the core, how we're relating to the other people in the room.
100%, 100%. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot to say. I feel like I have a lot to say about everything, but don't let them ever see you just not be passionate about this work, because when people feel that, they feel it. It's hard to differentiate between maybe that, and it's hard because if you're seeing 8, 9 people a day, 10 people, 7 people, 4 people, right? Each with their own nuances and challenges and beauty and fantastic good things that uplift you. If you're not careful, you might send a message that might not be the right one. And if you do and you catch yourself, I think we teach clients more about knowing how, and again, this is what Moshe said, not just saying it strategically, but showing that, how to be vulnerable about mailing it in right? Like, for example, every once in a while saying that, dude, I don't know, man. I don't know if you got anything from this session. Like let's could we redo that? Could we redo that? Right? Do we do that? Oh, we're afraid. And that's peer supervision also. In peer supervision, you could do the same thing, right? Whereas in an agency, sometimes it's a little bit harder because what cases do we bring to our supervisor? Right? Do we ever really bring the case where we're like, dude, let me show you this. Did I mess up in this? I don't know the first thing, right? A lot of times you don't. In peer supervision, I know I jumped, but we grow just like our clients do. What we do as well by being able to show so next time you with your peer, bring up the case where you really are just feeling like I'm such a poser, I'm such a fraud, right? Because that's where we learn, that's where we grow.
Yeah, and like the two people or the one or two people who will who you'll feel exposed in front of is worth a whole lot less than the great therapist you'll become in the future.
Right.
That's how I console myself sometimes.
Right.
And I'm still
Listen,
waiting for the day.
our clients need it also. They need the rah-rah, the you're great, you got this resource. They need the resource that's gonna be a good listener, right? And just like I always say in America, it's hard to find a friend who's gonna pull you aside and say, listen, it's funny, but like you're acting like, come on, like, dude, right? Bring yourself back, right? We don't get that as much, right? I don't know why. Societally, it's a whole question, but our clients need some of that.
Barry, that's why we go to Israel once a year.
It works for me. I'm coming with you,
Let's do it.
right? But Moshe, isn't that true? Like we need all types. We need all types. And if we're and if we only surround ourselves by cheerleaders, we're gonna get what Seligman says is like the first level, the happy, right?
Superficial,
Not,
false
but not,
assurance.
yeah, but
But
not
not good.
fulfillment,
Not good at what
growth,
we do.
not,
Right.
and the other side as well. Every once in a while, we need someone to say, yeah, but you know what? You rock, don't forget, so
Barry,
anyway, yes.
I know this was a big commitment for you, and I really appreciate taking you taking out the time to talk about the process of connecting in therapy. I feel like you're the master of it, so we picked the right person for the right topic, and I know it was a tough time for you to commit to. So thank you.
I really, Moshe, you guys should know that I was kicking and screaming, and Moshe's like, you'll see, this is so, and it's true. When I do it, it's good for me, so
I recall offering your money back if you don't have a good time.
one pastrami burger, please. That's all
Got
I
it.
want.
We'll talk after the show. Good
Thank
night,
you, guys.
everybody. Thank you, Barry.
Good
For
night.
those of you who want
Thank you
to,
so much.
for those of you who want to stay on for a minute and say hi, I'd love to meet you if I haven't yet. We're going to turn off the recording now. So